Welcome to Alligator Preserves, everyone. I am your host, Laurel McHargue, and I have with me today a debut author. Her name is Amber Herbert, and her book, Lipstick Covered Magnet. Amber, welcome to Alligator Preserves.
Hi, thanks for having me.
You are very welcome. Now, I have to ask you, first of all, when I got a copy of your book and I saw Lipstick Covered Magnet, I had to look it up. Okay, so I looked it up and I recognized even before I read the book that this is the title of a song from a group called the Front Bottoms.
Yes, yes, it is.
So my question to you is, what came first, the idea for this book or the title? Or
The
did the
idea
title
the
or did
idea
the
for the book came early, but the title came much later. I decided that it worked with the lyrics of the song and what the song means, so it just kind of stuck.
it totally works. And so that's why I was wondering if you maybe listened to the song and thought, oh, that would make for an interesting story. So before I ask you to give our readers an elevator pitch for this or a little bit about what the book is about, I'm going to read your author's note, okay? And so listeners and viewers, Amber's author's note reads, this novel contains mentions of suicide, sexual violence, mild drug, alcohol use, grief, and stalking. Read with care. All right. So, for any of you who need to know that, that's what you need to know. So, Amber, would you give our audience a little bit of a idea of, other than what I've just read, of what this book is about?
Yes. Now, the back cover actually just says she's running from her past and he's trying to become her present. So, really, it's a book about Skylar, the main character, dealing with her sexual trauma and other grief related issues, while someone else, someone she goes to college with, has started to stalk her. So, really, it's about healing as well as just kind of obsession in general. So, we can have two sides of the same coin.
Yes, and also on the back, it calls this a genre-bending debut that weaves the intricacies of healing with delusion and suspense, and that pretty much nails it. Who's your audience for this book?
I would say it's definitely more women's fiction, but I've been penning it more like a college fiction. So it kind of hits the new adult age range.
I would agree. I
Yeah.
would agree. And so my next question is, what inspired you to write a book about stalking as your debut novel?
That's a good question. Because really, the sexual assault and the trauma from that kind of stems from my own experiences. But the stalking kind of does too, in some way. I feel like a lot of young women have to deal with men who maybe pursue them and they don't necessarily love the pursual of those people. But I also had a pretty, you know, I had I had a stalker in about seventh grade, and he was harmless. But he would drive his bike down my street and call me outside my window and be like, "Oh, I can see you in there." And I'm like, "That's kind of weird." But that one never came of anything. So Connor's definitely an extreme version of that experience.
Were you able to address him? Did you talk to anyone about it? Your parents? How did you deal with that?
My parents knew. Like I said, he was fairly harmless. He just had this mega crush.
But
And
I mean,
after a while, it did go away. Maybe lasted a year and a half, or something like that. But after eighth grade, and we both went to different high schools, it kind of just stopped happening.
wow, okay.
Yes.
Because it definitely it felt somewhat autobiographical, I have to say, because again, you got into Connor's mind really, really well. And again, you're a young woman, and to get into the mind of a stalker, did you do a lot of research about that?
Not a ton. I've seen quite a few versions of this. I don't know if you ever watched You, that Netflix series. So
Yes,
that's
yes.
part of it. Obviously, we don't have murder in my book, but something similar, something kind of like a Joe Goldberg type.
Yeah. Okay. All right. So the book goes back and forth between the two main characters, Skylar, the young woman, and Connor, the stalker, with flashbacks to memories of something that happened to her in her past. Talk about how you wrote this book, because I think I read somewhere that you initially wrote, did you initially write all of the pieces individually and then you had to weave them together? How did you put this together? Because it really does mesh beautifully.
I think so. There was an earlier version of this, which actually happened to be her past experiences that I wrote in about, I want to say 2017, something like that,
Okay.
which was essentially what would have been the prequel for this book. And that one, I wrote them separately, and it was a mess. So I decided to write it again in 2020 for NaNoWriMo, of all things. And I
Yes.
decided to just write hers and then his. So how you read it is how I wrote it. Because the whole weaving was a total mess the first time I tried. I'm like, this is going to be terrible to try to put together. So it was definitely easier to just kind of switch perspectives in the draft.
How did you know it was a mess? Did you have anyone read it?
I did have, I mean, after I tweaked it first, no one reads the first drafts, not even me. I mean, like I wait a little while, but yeah, so I did get quite a few beta readers and things like that to kind of work out some niggles that are no longer in there.
Okay. All right.
Yeah.
That helps. And you mentioned NaNoWriMo, National
Yes.
Novel Writing Month, which is the month of November. And for those of you um, new authors, old authors, experienced authors, whatever, it's a 30-day challenge to write 50,000 new words, which is kind of crazy, but I've done it in the past, and it's a great inspiration to get stuff done, to move forward, to not edit, to just write a bunch of stuff, and it can come out to be a mess, right? And you
Yes.
say you save the editing for later, right? So the main character, Skylar, um, obviously loves Shakespeare and has an opportunity to go to London. Have you ever been to London?
I have.
It really feels like you totally know London, and you love Shakespeare, obviously, because there are a lot of allusions to that. Tell me about your experience with London.
We actually went to London for mine and my husband's belated, you know, uh, honeymoon. About 5 years late or something like that. But we decided to go to London. We didn't actually go to Stratford upon Avon, so everything that takes place there was heavily researched.
Okay.
um, we walked London. We saw some of the sites like the Tower of London. I don't even know if that's in the book. I can't remember exactly what's in there anymore. What made it in? And stuff like the Underground Club came from some British teen drama that I watched when I was about 17. And that's a thing that they do. So I was like, okay, that's kind of a fun little venue. Why don't we just put that in there? So some of it's based on media and some of it's based on actually walking around London for about a week.
That sounds amazing. Do you feel like you're going to go back?
Oh, definitely. I would love to live there eventually.
Why?
I've just always been drawn to England, and I feel like most of my interests are more British than they are American. So definitely an Anglophile. Yeah.
Any idea how that came about? I mean, were you
I think
you're
it's
you're
been
coming to us from Denver right now, right? Were you born and raised in Denver?
I'm in Colorado Springs,
Oh,
but
Colorado Springs.
I'm from California originally. I've been here since the age of 12. So I've spent most of my life in Colorado. Yeah,
Okay, but
I don't know where the love for England came from. I'd like to say it might stem from like Harry Potter or something because I'm about as old as those are. I'm 31, so I grew up with them and the movies and things, and I think maybe I got enmeshed in there and just never really found myself out of it.
all right. I was going to ask if you recall the first book you read that might have had a huge impact on you.
I mean, those were definitely a big part of my adolescence for sure. I don't know if that one really changed me. I don't know. I have so many favorite books that it's really hard to nail down just one that's like, this is the pivotal moment. Because I've
And
always been a huge reader.
I hate that question about what's your favorite because it just leaves out too many other things. So I try not to do favorite. I try to think more about um, um, maybe something more memorable. But so you have many allusions. You allude to many different books and films in this book in Lipstick Covered Magnet. And I wonder if you have read and or watched all of the things you allude to in here.
I believe so. I don't think there's anything in there that I did not read or
Okay.
watch.
Talk to me about the end of Alice. It's something I haven't
That one
researched.
is a difficult read. I wouldn't recommend it to everyone. I don't know if you looked into it at all.
Just a little bit.
Okay. I mean, it's about a like a serial child rapist or something like that. Something
Mhm.
very intense,
Very
heavy
intense.
stuff.
So you don't strike me as a dark personality. Although I will say that in my writing, my short stories tend to bring out my dark, weird, bizarre muse. I don't know why, because I'm not particularly a dark person. But do you know where this interest stems from? And you?
Also, childhood. I grew up watching a ton of Stephen King adaptations and the first, the Tim Curry It miniseries, and I watched that about the age of 8, maybe. So I've always been a horror buff, and that comes with a lot of dark thoughts, and a lot of mine does kind of come out in writing. Even in the first draft, I'll write something and I'll just sit there a moment and look at it. I'm like, that was in my head. That came from me. I don't know where it came from, but that's pretty dark. Usually I keep it anyway. But yes,
Yeah.
there's a dark there's a darkness, and I feel like a lot of us writers can kind of tap into that even if we aren't those things ourselves.
I get it. I absolutely get it. And I think we have many muses that are, floating around in our brains and we keep a lot of them repressed. And I love it when I let my dark muse out.
Yes.
So I want to read a passage about Catfish, which evidently is a movie I have not seen. But let me just read this passage about Facebook. And this is Skylar talking. Wait, no, is this Connor? No, yeah, sorry. This is Connor. Okay. What I've always found disgusting about Facebook and the fakeness it comes with is how willing so many people are to allow strangers into their personal lives. Why should strangers or people you've met once get the privilege of knowing you better than your family? In what world is that kind of system safe? So this is a chapter in which Connor decides to take on a fake profile so he can find out more information about Skylar. I think this is your opinion about Facebook.
So I don't have a Facebook anymore.
I noticed.
It's more just how open we are to the world. It would be really easy for anyone to have a stalker in this day and age. For a
Mhm.
lot, especially for my generation, I feel like we are so open and personal, and there's a lot of room to be stalked or you can put yourself in a threatening position just by what you post.
Right.
Yeah.
My mother used to tell me that I was way too out there when she was around. And again, I would tell her, "Well, Mom, I'm an author and a podcast host, and I have to have an author platform, right?" And so I'm sure you've heard that too. Your author
Yes.
platform, you have to be able to be found if you want to get any kind of audience. So,
Mhm.
what do you say to that?
I definitely agree that we do need that author platform. And most of mine has been I don't post about my family. Not that it's a problem, but my husband is doesn't have social media, and my kids aren't of the age yet where they have them. So I just kind of keep them out of my personal page. But most of mine's book related. So it's either I've got my blog, I've got a website, and my Instagram and Threads is pretty sparing.
Mhm. All right.
But it's definitely something that we need as authors to
Yeah,
be available, to be found by potential readers.
but not to provide too much.
They don't need to know where I am at that moment. Because I
Yeah.
remember for a while, people would be like, oh, I'm at this coffee shop right now on Facebook. I'm like, oh, okay, well, maybe not. Maybe you could post about that later when you're not there anymore.
Yeah. All right. Okay.
Yeah.
I recall when one of our sons was in college, all of a sudden, when I went to check out his Facebook page, because, mothers do that, excuse me, it was gray. There was nothing there.
Hmm.
I panicked because if there's no Facebook page, where are you? What is wrong? And I remember it was a Saturday morning. I remember calling him, waking him up, and totally confusing him when I asked if he was okay. And I honestly believe he might have been one of the first people ever in the world to delete his Facebook profile. Because again, he had found it to be too stressful, right? I mean, and the fact that social media is so prevalent and so always with us, right? I mean, the feeling that we always have to respond, always have to give a like, always have to, be in the loop is exhausting, frankly.
Yes.
Yeah. All right. Well, I want to read another passage, and this one, again, it feels personal. It's about healing. And Skylar finally decides that she needs some help, right? And sees a counselor. And the counselor tells her, just because you finally started opening up about those things doesn't mean you have healed from the trauma you've acquired because of them. It isn't as simple as talking about something and having it disappear forever. Talk about that.
You're right about it being personal. A lot of what Skylar goes through is something that I've had to work through. My trauma is not as intense as Skylar's. I never got to that point, but I do have trauma that I'm still dealing with. It's a journey,
Mm-hmm.
but it's kind of easy to pretend like you fixed it just by thinking about it.
And talking about it.
Yes.
Yeah. Um, there was something in my life that definitely was was horrifying, and I did find that the more I talked about it, the more it became kind of like a story that I would tell, and helped me in a way distance myself from the story.
Mm-hmm.
It almost became fiction to me, which was helpful. So I understand the premise behind talking about something and not keeping it bottled up as being a part of healing. Would you call Lipstick Covered Magnet a cautionary tale?
I think so. I've actually had a few men read this book,
Okay,
and one of them said that they were going to start recommending it for other men to read, which I found
that's
fascinating.
yes, yeah, yeah, that's awesome.
Yeah, because when he read it, he said that it's really easy to not notice how weird or creepy you can come off as a man if you're just kind of interested in a woman. There's
Mm-hmm.
certain lines that are often overstepped.
Yeah,
So in a way, definitely a cautionary tale,
yeah,
especially because she becomes so caught up in her own healing that she doesn't even notice him
and
so much.
again, yeah, the her chapters, she recognizes um, the triggers. She recognizes things that are happening that could turn into something worse, but she's also in her healing, I think, trying to maybe give the benefit of the doubt to Connor in ways.
Yes, which I have done before. It never became anything like Connor. It's kind of easy to brush someone off. So she's like, okay, they have a crush, it's fine. But
Yeah.
what if it's not fine? Was really where I went with this book.
And she has some very good friends in this book too, who are there for her and who help and ultimately protect her, would you say?
Yes.
And did you have such friends?
Alex is inspired by someone, one of my friends in high school, but he didn't take on the same form.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't really have anybody to look out for me per se. It was mostly me.
He was a beautiful character. I really, really loved him.
Thank you.
Yeah, you presented him really, really well. Amber, as a debut author of this book, I believe you've written other things maybe that you haven't published. Is this typical of what you write, or will continue writing?
No, probably not.
Tell me.
That Lipstick Covered My Men was a book that I felt like I had to write before I could write anything else. And I think it's because it was a catharsis sort of healing process on its own just by writing that. It was part
Okay.
of my healing journey.
All right. What do you prefer to write, or what are you working on now?
I have two fairly solid drafts. One is a not really a retelling, but a sequel to Peter Pan.
Oh,
So basically, what happens after Wendy leaves Neverland.
okay.
And that one's kind of like a dark fantasy.
I was gonna say that sounds fun.
Well, Neverland's crumbling, and Peter Pan has grown into a man since she's left.
All right.
So
He grew up.
yeah, he grew up. And then I also have a high fantasy adult series that I just finished the first draft of, the first book. So that's currently in a drawer. I'm not allowed to look at it for about another 3 weeks.
Oh,
Yeah.
tell me
Let
about
me
that.
breathe.
T- tell me
Yeah,
about the
that
not
one's,
allowed to look at it.
yes, not being allowed to look at it. That's more just so I can let it breathe. Kind of just let it sit there for a little bit, like you're supposed to do. That I'm terrible at doing, by the way.
Me too. Me too. As a matter of fact, I just had a visit yesterday with another author friend of mine, Cam Torrance. He's got a great series out there, and we talked about this because I'm I think 3 chapters short of finishing my next novel, and he asked me if I was going to put it away for a month, and I said, "What do you mean put it away for a month?" And he said, "Well, we're supposed to do that after you finish it. You're supposed to put it away for a month before you start editing."
Mhm.
And I asked why, and of course, the obvious response is you're way too close to your story as soon as you finish it, and if you immediately go back and start editing, you already know that it's great and that there's nothing wrong with it, and you'll fill in the blanks, and you won't see what is meant to be seen. And as you mentioned earlier in this interview, you said something about you've forgotten some of the things that might have made it in here, and
Yes.
I think that's good because, again, once we write something, it's out in the world, right? It's no longer ours. It belongs to the people. So good on you for putting away what you've just completed. I'll try really, really, really hard to do that. So once you publish this, how did you feel? Were you scared?
Maybe a little bit. I don't feel like I was as scared as I expected I would be.
That's good.
Because I was like, oh, it's a little terrifying to have people read it. Although sometimes when someone's like, oh, I'm reading it now, I'm like, don't tell me that. Because now I'm going to worry about where you are, like what you're thinking. So if you're going to buy it, I don't want to know when you're reading, which is really funny that it still bothers me. I'm like, oh, that's great. I get like some almost performance anxiety or something. Like, oh, you're reading my words. That's scary.
How are you going to judge me?
Exactly.
Yeah. Yeah, that's part of it too. I've written some short stories before and shared them with my husband, and he's asked me if he needs to sleep in the other room tonight after after I read the story to him. I scare him a little bit sometimes, but that's okay because I think, we want our readers to feel things, right?
Yes.
I mean, if they're not feeling anxious, excited, frightened, horrified, happy, if they're not feeling the feels, then we're missing something. And you definitely have a lot of feels in this book. A lot of feels in this book. Do you have any advice to other authors, other potential debut authors?
Definitely do your research. Know what you're doing before you just send it off into the world. Get ARC readers and market it in some way, which I did do.
Mm-hmm.
But this one was a hard sell, even for me, because it doesn't really fit into a particular genre. So my experience isn't necessarily what everybody else will experience.
Okay. All right. Switching gears right now, I understand that you are the technology chairperson for Rocky Mountain Fiction Writers.
I am.
Yes.
Yes.
And the Rocky Mountain Fiction Writers Conference is coming up the last weekend in September.
Mm-hmm.
And I will meet you in person then because I will be
Yes.
presenting a workshop on flash fiction at the Rocky Mountain Fiction Writers Conference. What else can you tell our listeners about this conference, which I believe is still open for registration?
Yes, it is still open. And apart from being the tech chair, I'm also the conference admin. So I'm talking to everybody, presenters, registration, registrants, everything. And I believe we're open until September 10th for registrations.
Okay. Right around the
This year,
corner.
yes, this year we started something new, which is the Saturday day pass. And so if you can't afford or don't want to be there for all 3 days, you
Mhm.
can come at our busiest day, where we also have the pitch appointments with agents. I believe we have 5 or 6, I think it's 6, that are, although I think there's only about 3 with actual appointments left at this point.
Okay.
But yeah, so that's been interesting to try to do the day pass as well as the registration, the regular registration.
Okay.
And we have a lot of great presenters like yourself. And we also have Chuck Wendig and Beverly Jenkins as keynote speakers. So I don't know, I feel like we have a great lineup, and we have a diverse set of workshops that I'm excited about, and that I hope
Mhm.
I can at least attend a couple, given I'm the, the admin and might be stuck at the info desk for most of it. But it
Right.
looks like a great lineup.
Yes, and I've been to the conference before, and the challenge is you want to go to everything, and you cannot because there are many things going on at the same time. Will you be pitching one of your
I
new
will be.
novels? You will be?
I
All
believe
right.
so. I haven't fully decided. I have a pitch appointment,
Okay.
but I'm also working on a new novel right now because I write every day, and I'm writing a horror fantasy sort of deal. And I might
All right.
pitch that one instead of the high fantasy that will probably be in revisions for over a year. so, so it's also, what do I pitch, and will I have something ready in time?
Which one excites you more?
That's really hard to say. This fantasy has been, you know, I've been working on it for 3 years now. I've had to scrap 4 drafts, so this one finally made it to a full draft. So it's been a journey, and sometimes I
Yes.
love it, sometimes I hate it. so,
Yes. You have scrapped 4 drafts.
and I want to say that they averaged about between 30,000 and 45,000 words each before I
Okay.
tossed them. So it wasn't just a chapter or two; it was a
That's a
third of
significant, yeah.
the
Yeah.
yes.
Now, now I'm curious. When you say toss them, are we talking you just deleted everything and you started from scratch?
I did start from scratch, but I do have all of the versions saved on my computer and on flash drives. You never know. I might recycle something.
I
I never
think,
actively delete something from existence.
I think I
Yeah.
read somewhere that Margaret Atwood had scrapped like 150 pages of a novel that she had been working on, and she just knew that it wasn't right. It might have had something to do with the point of view she had chosen to present it from.
Yeah.
So, which again is that's a really important decision to make when you're writing any kind of novel.
Yes.
Who's
That was actually one of my problems with this one. The main character needed to be the side character because it turned out he wasn't as exciting as the side character was. So I had to flip the main characters, and then I think I started writing from first person and realized that third person was better. So
okay.
there's been a lot of, and the outlines are entirely different as well. So the outlines changed about 4 times.
All
It's
right.
been a process.
Are you a planner? More of a planner than a pantser?
I'm somewhere in between, but
Okay.
I found out that fantasy you can't necessarily wing as readily as lipstick covered magnet, because that one was fairly easy to kind of allow to just exist in the way it wanted to be written.
Oh, that is very interesting because
Yeah.
I would think just the opposite. I would think that in a book like this where you're going back and forth between two main characters, you would have to do more planning. And with fantasy, well, at least in my case, I've allowed things to emerge and surprise me. And so talk a little bit about surprises. Do you ever get surprised when you're writing?
Oh, constantly. Happened a lot with this fantasy that I just finished up. I was like, well, that was not expected. And usually I like it, so I'll incorporate it in some way. I'm like, this might have to change how the magic system works, but I like it.
Okay. Do you, in what you're working on right now, I don't know if you want to share a title.
The fantasy or the horror that I just started?
Both.
Both. Okay. So the fantasy, the first book of the series, is called Secrets of Onwin.
Okay.
And Onwin is actually, I believe, a Welsh name for the other world. So it's
Okay.
kind of like a completely different universe sort of deal.
All right.
And then the horror that I've recently added some fantasy elements to is called Jagged Edges.
Okay.
Yes.
And surprises? You're letting them
Surprises
maybe?
with this Jagged Edges, yeah.
Okay.
I brought
All
in
right.
some Arthurian legends, like Mordred. And I was like, okay. So Mordred is almost a demon that can be summoned to do
All right.
someone's bidding. I was like, oh, I don't know where that came from.
But it showed up.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. Do you know how your novels are going to end when you begin them?
Usually. Will I keep to that exact ending? Not usually. It usually will change as I write it. I found the characters have a mind of their own.
Yeah.
As ridiculous as that phrase always is, given it's all me, but they're all
Is it?
versions of myself, maybe? I don't know.
Right. I
They
mean,
become their own people and they surprise me. And they like to go off on adventures that I didn't plan.
right.
And most of the time, it does benefit the plot. So
Hmm.
I'm not usually irritated.
Yeah. I'm the same way. And, is it me or is it a muse? Is it something that just my brain has allowed in from the
Right?
universe? I
Sometimes
don't
it
know.
feels like it's not me. I'm just channeling some other spirit or muse or something. I don't know
Exactly.
where that came from, but I don't know if it's me.
Right. No, I
Yeah,
feel the same way. I'm with you on that. Do you dream? Do you remember your dreams?
I do, and they're always weird. I don't always remember them after about 5 minutes of waking up.
Right.
I
Right.
also always know I'm dreaming. So I don't tend to change anything. I'm like, this is weird. Let's see where it goes.
All right. What's that called when you're in a dream and you know you're dreaming and you can maybe make things happen?
I think that's lucid
Lucid,
dreaming.
lucid dreaming, lucid dreaming. Yeah. I think
But I'm just usually along for the ride. I'm like, this is fascinating. I'll watch.
I've woken up screaming before. I've woken up laughing before. Much to the dismay of my husband, who doesn't necessarily want to be woken up by a screaming woman. Oh yeah. Well, Amber Herbert, debut author of Lipstick Covered Magnet. You will send me a few photos. I will have show notes with links and photos on my website at leadvillelaurel.com. Any last words to our listeners and viewers before I let you go?
I hope to see some of you at the Colorado Gold Conference because I'm sure there's some overlap between your listeners and our troupe of Colorado based writers.
Well, I thank you very much for your honesty, your willingness to talk about a really difficult topic, several really difficult topics. And I wish you the best of luck with this and with your pitch session, with whatever you decide to pitch at the Colorado Gold Conference for Rocky Mountain Fiction Writers. And I look forward to meeting you in a few weeks, in a month, right?
Yes, I'm looking forward to it.
I'll see you there. I'll buy you a coffee.
Oh, thank you.
Take care, Amber, and we'll see you soon.